you doing there, Connie?
I'm good, just trying to find some place I could put this phone and I'm not just holding it for the next 45 minutes. So
Okay,
Oh,
we're
yeah.
on.
Yeah, it makes it
Well,
easier. Makes it easier. Yeah, good. You could just listen.
yeah.
Ready, Gabriel?
We're recording right now. We're already live.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. So, hi, everybody. I'm Ed Beckley, and here we are on Wednesday night, and we're going to be talking about the 7 stages of consciousness. Established in being, perform action. Be at peace and know that I am God, the Bible says. Each of those are pointers, and they're pointing in a direction of our true essence, our true reality. However, in this dimension of consciousness in which we live now, there are 7 different levels of consciousness. And we're going to go over those tonight, each of those levels. And I think that you can hear these levels and you can ponder them and think about them and see how they apply in your life. So, level 1, basically, we have a mental, the first 3 are mental, emotional consciousness, or awake, the dream state, and deep sleep. So let's take the waking state, the so-called waking, the so-called conscious state. I want to suggest that the so-called conscious state isn't so conscious. Basically, the conscious state is basically a spewing of our own conditioning, our conditioning from the past. You see, we've been shaped, molded, and sculpted by our parents, by teachers, by friends, by significant events in our life, education, and very importantly, by our genetic makeup. Recent discoveries have suggested that our genetic makeup affects our behavior to a much larger extent than we thought. Imagine that you're still living out certain behavior of an ancestor that may have passed away 200 years ago. We still have some of that DNA. Watching a television show the other day, and I saw that this one star on TV had his DNA analyzed all the way back, and he had 3% DNA of the Neanderthal. You imagine that. Evolving from the Neanderthal to our present state. But that state of consciousness, basically that we say that third dimensional state, the mind, that behavior, it's all programmed. And so basically in the third dimension, most people function based on automatic behavior that they've learned from teachers and again, parents, events in their life. And as a result of that, they're enslaved by that past behavior because that past behavior is shaping what they're doing presently. And that's that first state, that first initial state of consciousness. So that's the waking state. And then we have the dream state, and we all know that the dream state of consciousness corresponds much differently. Oftentimes, the dream state has remnants of what we would call reality, but also it really appears to be kind of worked through a fantasy almost at times. Very groggy, very difficult, very bizarre things can happen. The rules within the context of this third dimension sometimes don't seem to be operating so well, particularly in that dream state. We're all familiar with in the dream state that, or most of us are familiar, I guess, that we're running away from something, or we desire something within, and it just feels like all we desired. It may not even be a very life supporting desire, or we may not be running away from anything but our own fears. And so in that dream state, it's a mirror image of much of our subconscious. If you really want to know about your subconscious, and I don't think you need to spend a lot of time, but maybe some time on the subconscious part of our life, then look at your dreams, journal your dreams. The third part is deep sleep. Now, in deep sleep, typically while we're in deep sleep, we have no memory of it. Once in a while, we have a glimpse of awareness within the context of it, but there's no memory, meaning there are no objects within it, words, feelings, none of that. It's pure transcendent. And that's why it's important to move into deep sleep, move into REM, rapid eye movement, each evening, because we get that deepest level of sleep. And so we fall into the still transcendent. And that's where we get so much of our rest. Fourth state of consciousness is what we call the transcendental state. All of you that have been meditating, and as I teach you to meditate, you'll find that you transcend, you go beyond thought, you go beyond form, you go beyond feeling into a sublime level, very similar to deep sleep, but we still have an awareness. That we call that the fourth state of consciousness. What are some of the features of it? Some of the qualities. Calmness. When we touch that delicious state, the fourth state of consciousness that is transcending, whether we're meditating or whether or not we just are beholding a beautiful sunset, a view. What I talk about in my book is we're stunned and we're stilled. And in that moment, before we say a word, we look at that beautiful scenery. And what do? Oftentimes we'll say, oh, isn't that beautiful? So we've just taken the unbounded experience, a sublime experience in which we felt this unbounded glory, this unbounded bliss, this unbounded feeling. We're looking out over the ocean or a beautiful sunset or a high mountain, whatever it might be, the birth of a baby. And all of a sudden we just feel, we allow that. And that takes us to this stillness. Stillness is a transcendental quality. Remember, when we're within the first, at least two levels of consciousness, waking and dreaming, objects are moving. What do I mean by objects? I mean anything in the relative. I mean something that we can hear, see, touch, taste. Any of those anything that we can hear, touch, taste, or smell is in the relative. But when we go into the transcendent, there's nothing we can touch, taste, hear, or smell. There's an inspiration, and it enlivens us inside. And we fall in to our original state, which is the transcendental state. This is our pure state. This is our original naked face of who we truly are. Let go. During the day, even in simple states of awareness, we can fall in to the transcendental state. As we meditate a little longer, a little deeper, that transcendental state begins to expand. In the beginning, we meditate, and the metaphor I've given many people is taking a cloth, putting it into dye. Just like when we meditate, we go in, we meditate. When we come out, over time, that meditation gets eroded, and maybe we don't feel as calm after a few hours as we felt right after meditation. So the metaphor is, just like in meditation, we go inward, we're dipping the cloth in the dye, and then we're bringing it out into activity, into the sunshine, and that cloth begins to fade. But then the next day or that evening, we meditate again, we come out in front of the sun, and it fades. We bring it in, back into the sun, now it fades, but not as much. And so we begin to shift our focus in realities from this third dimension. It happens over time to the fourth dimension, and that's the inner dimension that has always been there, the only thing that is permanent within and beyond the concept of this universe. The fifth state of consciousness is when that transcendental state becomes more permanently established, and we begin seeing the world through the prism of the stillness, the witness. We look out from a calm, pure place out through the screen of the mind. Now, the mind is still going to be functioning in its own way. But as we stabilize this fifth state of consciousness, which is known as cosmic consciousness, what it means is that underlying stillness never goes away, whether you are awake, whether you're dreaming, and even in deep sleep, we're able to fall in to its essence. That's the fifth state of consciousness, and we call that cosmic consciousness. Stepping back, seeing the world, seeing all this world from a broader perspective. And the difference is if you're down in the village and you're looking around the village and you're trying to solve some problem, what's going on in the village, it's more difficult to see. But and it's hard to get an idea and the concept of the whole village. But our stillness, if we can head up to the mountain and we can look over the whole village, we get a broader view, a much more holistic view of everything. Cosmic consciousness gives us the clarity and the ability to see things from what's been called a wide-angle lens, and that's cosmic consciousness. Very, very important in that area. Now, the sixth level of consciousness is just a refinement of it and known as God consciousness. Why? Because, and by the way, God consciousness can come in any of the others, even even earlier than that. It can be looking out over something and just being in such appreciation, almost in love with it. And we've all experienced that. I talked about it. I think back on the birth of my children and how I felt just my heart swell and open, and I was stilled, and I didn't know I had no words for it. It was beyond comprehension. And that's God consciousness. You feel in such, and bliss is the only word. There's a lot of bliss in God consciousness. And it's also known as refined cosmic consciousness because we still have that stillness in the background. And it doesn't mean that you're a real stick in the mud kind of person. It just simply means that you don't get overshadowed. You recognize what the mind is. The mind is merely a set of programs that were beyond your control, and some of which you certainly contributed to. But now we're able to step back, look at it in cosmic consciousness and in God consciousness. We can step back and we can begin appreciating the beauty, the sublime life in which we live. The seventh state of consciousness is known as unity, the unified field of consciousness. It's beautiful. If anybody's familiar with physics, we're familiar with the quantum field that physicists are talking about. And in the quantum field of consciousness, basically quantum mechanics in the area of physics, everything comes from nothing. Something manifests from nothing. As a matter of fact, in an experiment, what they did is they had a vacuum, and they wanted to, theoretically, they wanted to actually take all the light out of the atmosphere. So they built this big machine to take the light out. And they wanted to measure if we got all the light, all the external sources of light in here in this darkness, what would happen? And still a half photon of light would manifest inside that tube. So it shows it's coming. Something is coming from so-called nothing. But we all know that nothing is everything. And that's the seventh state of consciousness, the unity, where I am that, thou art that, and all this is that. How do we move through these stages of consciousness? We move through it through a systematic approach, a daily approach of meditation, twice a day, where we dip ourselves into that vat of stillness, and then we come out and we act. In the evening, we dip ourselves back in, cleansing our mind, cleansing our body, our emotional body, and then we act again. And as we begin doing that, we begin functioning more from a surrendered, a deep, peaceful level. And what you'll start to find is life starts going a lot easier. There's not resistance to what is, there's allowing life to simply unfold as it will. Jai Ma. Now what we'll do is we're going to do a little bit of breathing, and then